Hey friends, it's Gina. Welcome to the Rebookery channel. Today I thought I would try to do a quick little tutorial on how I sew on paper. Now this video is going to be a little choppy because I don't have the right equipment or the time or the patience to film how I sew in the best way for you guys to be able to see it. So I tried to do the best I can. Hopefully I can give you some insight on how I sew on paper and maybe inspire you to dig out your sewing machine and try a few stitches. So one of the first things that people ask me a lot about is what type of needle do I use? I just use whatever needle is in my sewing machine. Now I didn't realize that needles had, like different sizes and numbers, but I talked to a sewing machine guy here recently and he said, first of all, that I was crazy for sewing on paper, but then second of all, he said, if you're going to sew on paper, you want to use like a size 20 needle. So I bought some size 20 needles and those are the ones that I use. Usually my needles are good. I don't know, I think maybe I've broken one needle in all the years that I've sewn. The thing is I just go really slow and I try, to help my machine along as it's sewing through thicker stuff. So I'll use the little wheel that's on the upper right hand corner to kind of help my needle go through thicker materials. Now's probably a good time to tell you that I am not a sewing expert. My sewing skills are very limited. I can sew straight stitches. I used to sew tops for quilts when I first got my sewing machine. I've made curtains and now I sew on paper. So my skills are very limited, but I feel comfortable enough that I can maneuver my way around a machine. So speaking of machines, the two machines that I have, this is a Singer that I bought back in 2015. Not a fan of this. It has already broken on me once, and because it was not made in the United States, it's very hard to find someone to work on it. Basically, I wasted my money on this one, but as long as I don't do anything fancy with it, it seems to be okay now. I have a feeling it will probably break down again in the near future, and I will probably just get rid of it and get a better machine. The guy I took it to have it fixed told me that these are pretty much the bottom of the barrel sewing machines, even though it says heavy duty. So there's my 2 cents worth on that machine. This is my baby. This is a Kenmore from 1990. This was a gift from my husband when I graduated from high school. I was the oldest 18-year-old that graduated that year. So this baby has been with me forever and I love this machine. It has had to be repaired one time and had belts replaced and stuff like that. But it's pretty basic and it has just a few stitches, but I absolutely love this machine. It is a workhorse, it is a go-to, and this actually is easier to get serviced because it was made, or most of the parts were made in the United States, and it's metal, not plastic, which that's a big thing when I guess you buy sewing machines, is to buy a metal machine, not a plastic machine. So the fabric that I use is all scraps. It's stuff that I've found at thrift stores, or these scraps I got at a fabric recycling store. These are quilting scraps. Now I like these because they were already cut and I just love the variety of colors and patterns. But any type of fabric works. I like to use like vintage sheets and just cut apart the little bits and have them ready to go whenever I sit down to my sewing machine. Scissors are a big thing when you sew. I use Fisker scissors and I need to take more care of them. These have glue on them, but I have 2 or 3 different pairs and I try not to cut paper with them because it does dull the blades. I like these little ones because I can rip the seams whenever I make a mistake. Now this right here is a go-to. You need this if you're going to sew on paper. This is an adhesive remover. I don't know that they make this particular brand anymore. This was from my old scrapbooking days, but you can use fingernail polish remover and a Q-tip, and you just wipe your needle ever so often just to make sure you don't have glue or anything built up, because that will jam your machine. So once I have my stuff ready to go, I just sit down and feed my paper through my machine going really slow. Like I said, I like to use my hand to help maneuver the wheel up in the upper right hand corner of the machine, and I know it has a name, but I cannot remember the name of it. And just kind of add my fabric as I go. I'm not a person that uses pins. I can't, even when I sewed on fabric, I just could never use pins. It drove me nuts. Because I just didn't want to waste the time. I was being too lazy. So I just go really slow and feed my fabric in on top of my paper. Now I sew on paper, scrapbook paper, notebook paper, cardstock. I have sewed on some thin cardboard or bookboard before. I've sewed on leather and of course denim, which by the way, they sell certain needles that are called denim needles, and those would be a really thick needle that you would be able to go through a lot of material if you were worried about breaking your needle. So you can just kind of see here, I'm making a little pocket, and I'm going to add these to some journals that I'm working on. I'm lazy in that I don't like to constantly pull what I'm sewing on out, cut the thread, and then start over again. So I kind of just keep it all going in one continuous line, because I feel like once I've gotten my stitch started, it's easier just to keep feeding paper and fabric through my machine, and then I end up with one big long chain of whatever it is that I've sewed. So kind of just making some pockets now out of some recipe. I think those are recipe pages from a recipe book or a cookbook. The thinner, more fragile pages you have to be careful with, because your needle will just obliterate the paper. So, you know, always want to make sure you've got paper that's not too old, too vintage and falling apart. Otherwise your needle will just destroy it. While I'm thinking about it, let me talk to you about sewing on tape. So remember the adhesive remover I showed you guys. If you sew on washi tape, you are going to gum up your needle. You are going to gum it up really bad. And I know this because I've done it several times. Washi tape just does not do well in sewing machines. I've spent a lot of time having to go through and take the gunk off of my needles. So just be very careful if you sew through tape, because you will get your needles pretty gummy. These are some book covers that I'm working on right now. And people have asked, do I sew on cardboard? Some cardboard I can. These guys I did not. What I did was I just sewed the fabric first, and then I glued them onto the covers of the books. So here are the pockets that I just made. And here are some cardstock pages that I'll put those little pieces of fabric on. This is the pocket that I made out of the cookbook pages. There's a little ruffle that you saw me as I was feeding it through the machine. I just used my fingers to kind of add a little crimp to the fabric. And so there you go. So guys, I hope this was helpful, and I hope that maybe you gained some inspiration, and maybe you might want to try sewing on some paper. If you have any questions that I didn't answer, which I'm sure there's a lot, let me know in the comments. I would love to know how you guys sew on paper, what you use to remove your adhesive, and things like that. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this, please give me a thumbs up or a subscribe, share it with a friend, and have a great rest of the day. Bye.